All right, so now we've looked at CSS from a very basic standpoint. Again, like HTML, giving you hopefully the basic tools that you can build on and the tools that you'll need for the first set of pages that you create. More than HTML, I think a lot of this will come from experience using CSS, but more than HTML, you will often have to kind of tweak it. You have to work with it. And so when you create a CSS-based design, you'll probably have to load it in a browser, multiple browsers, and make sure that it works and that things are spaced correctly and kind of things work out. You'll probably end up with problems that you have to kind of solve, like why isn't this working just the way I want it to? There's a little bit more debugging that happens with CSS, but you'll find that becomes faster as you become more experienced with it. I think a lot of you probably are wondering why aren't we doing HTML5 and CSS3, the newest, the latest, the greatest. One of the reasons for this is that, let me start with HTML5. We will actually touch a little bit more on some of the advantages HTML5 gives us in terms of media and embedding in a later section. But a lot of the things that show up in HTML5 and CSS3 really right now only work on a handful of browsers. And so the question is, do you really want to design for 10% or 20% of users? There are people out there who say, yes, I only want to design for, you got this with screen size. Why am I designing for an 800 pixel wide screen when everyone I know has 2,000 pixels wide? And, you do get some of that. You also get people who say, forget Internet Explorer. That's probably not what they say exactly, but, they even have flags up that say, you're using Internet Explorer, you can't see my site. Go and download Firefox or Opera or something. And I think that's a dumb thing to do. And if you ever get hired to do web design, that's a good way to get fired doing web design. A professional designer is expected to be able to create something that is usable by most of the people who visit the site. And I think beyond that, you have a responsibility for making it accessible to as many people as possible. All that said, that doesn't mean that you have to completely avoid CSS3. What it does mean is that some of the things that you do in CSS3 may not be available to people who are visiting in other browsers. If that doesn't significantly degrade their experience, then go for it. Why not? So I'm going to touch on just, I think, two or three little toys. These are more shiny new things than they are something useful. You can certainly use them. But one of the things that was brought in with CSS3 was a little bit more you could do with borders. So let's start by playing with that. You'll remember this is our version of the Zen Garden CSS for now. And I'm going to focus on this piece right here, the horizontal bar we did at the top. You'll notice it's a little bit different. I've added in a rule that says it's 400 pixels wide and put in auto for the margins there so it's centered. And so I did a little bit of tweaking in between since the last time you've seen it, but it's basically the same. I'm going to add in a rule. First I'm going to take out that border around it, and I'm going to add in a rule that's for a drop shadow. Now, just as a quick note here, the drop shadow right now is not implemented everywhere. So eventually it'll be something like, box shadow, followed by the horizontal run, the vertical run, how much fuzziness there should be. I forget what the proper word for that is. And then the color of the shadow you're using. So that's the way it will be eventually. That's the way it should be eventually. Right now, however, this doesn't render, I don't think, maybe it renders in Opera, but I don't think it renders in any browser. So instead, we're going to have to do a special tag here. Right now, Firefox and other Mozilla-based browsers can do a box shadow, can do the CSS3 box shadow, but require that you do the -moz part in front so that it recognizes it as only Mozilla. So that's a little bit of a pain. Actually, I think that WebKit can do it too. I'm not sure. You have to keep up to date because they come out with new browsers fairly frequently, and they will increasingly support these things. But right now they're doing these little special tags to support it. So if there's a WebKit that probably says -WebKit -box shadow or something like that. So let's see if this has an effect in our Mozilla browser, in our Firefox browser. Okay, that's probably a little dark back there, but you maybe can see it there. We have a very slight drop shadow hiding out behind there. It's fine, but let me see if I can There. That gets us a little bit darker so you can see it a bit better. And so there we go. Darker and fuzzier. That's looking much better. So I've gotten rid of the border. The only reason you can see there's a border here at all is because we have the drop shadow. In fact, you can't see it on the top at all. So so there's our drop shadow. One of the things that people are excited about is drop shadow. You can have drop shadows both in box shadows and text shadows, so the text leaves the shadow. It's funny because for a while when people started using Photoshop, you started seeing drop shadows on everything. It became a cliche. And now I think with CSS3 out again, we'll start to see drop shadows showing up a lot. Speaking of cliche, one of the other cliches that is kind of considered the Web 2.0 cliche is rounded corners. So this is done using a property called border radius, and we'll just say we'll make it very rounded. Let's make it 13 pixels rounded. So this is the radius of the corner that you want. And in fact, if we try this, you'll see, again, nothing happens yet. This is, again, something that we can get in Mozilla, and I think, again, WebKit. WebKit is the basis for Safari and a couple of other browsers. So we can do that as a Mozilla, and you'll see that this becomes a rounded corner. So this is just kind of stuff fun to play with. I'm going to do one more thing. This is something that I mentioned. I may have mentioned when we were talking about fonts that you can actually download your own fonts. And this has been in the standard since CSS2, and actually Internet Explorer was early on this, but they did it in kind of a funky way. Right now, I'm just rather than typing this out, I'm just going to dump it in here, and I'll explain it. Note that this is an added inclusion. This is something we haven't run into before. It's telling the CSS preprocessor something that's a definition of something that's going to come up. We actually have hit the add before as an import. We just haven't really talked about it. That one of the ways you can bring in CSS files is to import them using add import. But right now we're going to talk about @FontFace. @FontFace lets you load a font face, either a true type or an open type, a number of different kinds of font faces. And what you tell it is what you want to call this font family. I'm going to call it Budmo. What the font weight normal is, what the font style is, in this case normal. In some cases you might want to load in more than one font, right? Because you might have a font family of Budmo and also have an italic version or also have a bold version. But right now I'm telling it this is the version of the font I want to use. And then the source for that. And in this case you have to give it the file. So you have to upload in this case, a true type font up to the server and load it. So what I've done now is I've defined this font face. So now instead of using Holiday Super Cool as my favorite one, I can use Budmo. All right, so I've used Budmo, and I said in H1, I want you to choose Budmo if you can get it, and I've told you how to get it, so you've got it, right? This is not an image. This is actually, I don't know if I would have chosen this normally, but this is actually the font file being loaded in. So I can actually copy this out as text and paste it somewhere else. This isn't an image, which is actually pretty cool if you think about it, because you can do all of these titles this way. There were ways to do this before using JavaScript and some trickiness, but this is a great way to do it. Again, if someone has a browser that's going to be able to handle it. So you need to make sure that you still do especially for fonts, that you still do the which ones do we do if we can't get this one. But this gives you the opportunity to load in your absolutely favorite font, especially for things like titles, if you want to. Keep in mind that you need to have licenses. That is, this is a freely licensed font that I can use commercially or privately, and I don't have to worry about it. But you need to make sure that you aren't using copyrighted fonts. All right, so this ends us up for CSS. Again, this is kind of just a little bit of powdered sugar on top of the well, you don't put powdered sugar on the meat, but the powdered sugar on top of the cake of CSS that we've already done. From here, we're going to kind of take a step back, and you'll find that you probably don't create a lot of pages with HTML by itself as HTML, but you do use CSS consistently. So as we move forward, we'll continue to use CSS as we're moving on to talking about content management systems and beyond. So we'll see you there.